6,000 men crucified in a single day, lions loose in the arena, and punishments so twisted even Rome's emperors lost sleep. This isn't a movie. These are facts. Today, you'll see 20 Roman torture methods that still shock experts right now. Let's start with number 20. Crucifixion was designed to kill slowly in public agony. In 71 BCE, Roman forces crucified about 6,000 survivors from Spartacus along the Appian Way. That road ran almost 200 kilometers between Rome and Capua, so merchants saw the warning for days. Why choose a road instead of a hidden field? Because Rome wanted strangers to carry fear home. Roman writers treated crucifixion as a penalty for slaves, rebels, and other non-citizens. Citizens usually avoided it unless the state claimed an extreme case, like desertion during a crisis. So the punishment worked like a social boundary, and people learned their rank by watching. Modern medical studies estimate the patibulum crossbeam at 34 to 57 kilograms. If you carried that after a beating, your shoulders did the work of the execution already. Outside the city gate, the stipes waited planted in the ground, which saved Rome time. Once raised, death could take many hours, sometimes more than a full day. A medical review calls crucifixion designed to produce a slow death with maximum suffering. Breathing gets harder as the body hangs, so every exhale becomes a decision and a struggle. Passers-by saw the charge and the body together, so law turned into public theater. Even burial could be denied, which mattered in Roman culture that feared the unburied dead. That sets up the part people forget, because Rome often started with the whip first. Here comes number 19. Scourging ripped skin open before execution even started. Roman scourging used a heavy, multi-thong scourge built for repeated harsh blows. It shows up as a separate penalty and also as a setup for later execution. Do you see the logic? Weaken the body first, then the final sentence becomes quicker. Sources describe dozens of strikes delivered by trained soldiers, not random street violence. Each hit adds blood loss, shock, and deeper tissue damage that stacks fast. Medical reconstructions say severe scourging can drop blood volume enough for hypovolemic shock. That means a victim might collapse before the cross even appears in the story. So when a crowd says the sentence starts at the cross, Rome says it started earlier. The whip turned walking, standing, and breathing into work, and that work cost time. Some legal texts for parricide describe rods stained with his blood before any further penalty. That phrase matters because it shows blood was expected, planned, and treated as procedure. How do you resist after that, when your body has already paid the price up front? For the crowd, scourging looks like preparation, almost like a ritual warm-up. For the victim, it feels like the moment returning to normal life becomes impossible. Once the whip stops being a prelude, the punishment shifts into full flagellation. Let's move to number 18. Flagellation tore muscle apart until movement failed. Roman punishment guides list flogging alongside exile, mines, and execution, which tells you it was routine. They also point out a class divide, because the poor faced physical penalties far more often. So who took the lash? Usually slaves and low-status people, while elites often paid money. Slaves could be whipped for forgery, theft, or disobedience, and household power backed it up. Citizens risked it only after crossing certain lines, yet the system still protected hierarchy. That is why the whip worked as control. It punished and also reminded people of rank. Unlike a fine, flagellation left scars that lasted for years, sometimes for life. Those scars changed movement, workability, and sleep, turning the body into living evidence. Early Christian sources describe believers surviving flagellation and carrying permanent damage afterward. Why does that matter for Rome? Because a scarred body keeps teaching the lesson every day. The state did not need to repeat the trial when the back already carried the sentence. And when officials decided scars were not enough, they escalated to a louder kind of spectacle. That is where the arena comes in, because the crowd wanted entertainment and rulers wanted control. The result was damnatio ad bestias, where the sentence came with teeth and claws. Once animals replaced the whip, the city learns fear can be sold like a ticket. Next one is number 17. Damnatio ad bestias meant being eaten alive for entertainment. Augustus bragged he staged 26 shows where over 3,500 wild beasts were killed. He also staged a special spectacle that included at least 36 crocodiles in one event. That scale tells you Rome was buying terror with logistics, ships, cages, and handlers. Damnatio ad bestias means condemnation to the beasts, and it worked as public entertainment. Runaway slaves, murderers, and early Christians could end up on the sand together. Do you notice the point? It erased different stories and turned them into one outcome. The condemned might face different animals, different timing, and sometimes even costumes. But one thing stayed fixed. The crowd came to watch a human die on purpose. That crowd response mattered because rulers used applause as proof the city supported punishment. Historians point out that importing predators from North Africa over decades likely reduced wildlife numbers. So, Rome gained spectacle while ecosystems paid a cost far away, which is a hidden trade-off. Each show also displayed wealth, because feeding arenas with beasts required money and networks. For the victim, the worst part was the waiting, hearing cages move and gates scrape open. For the city, the worst part was training itself to cheer state violence as normal. And when Rome wanted a stranger kind of moral message, it chose a sack instead. Let's move to number 16. Poena Culae sealed victims with animals to drown in terror. Poena Culae targeted parricide, the killing of a parent, and Rome treated it as a top offense. Around 100 BCE, sources record Publicius Malleolus sewn into a sack and thrown into water. That case matters because it shows the penalty existed early and was remembered for centuries. Over the next 600 to 700 years, jurists describe versions with a dog, rooster, monkey, and snake. By Hadrian's reign, 117 to 138 CE, the sack became an option alongside damnatio ad bestias. So the state kept it ready for a crime it saw as poison to family order. In 318 CE, Constantine changed the penalty again, proving even ancient rituals were adjustable. Justinian's law code in the 6th century still listed the sack for parricide. That long timeline shows the idea stayed useful, even as emperors and laws shifted. One legal summary quotes the formula: beaten with rods, stained with his blood, then sewn in. Why add animals? Because panic inside the sack made drowning feel like chaos, not closure. It also denied normal burial, removing the condemned from land, sky, and grave together. That ritual removal connects to another kind of group control, where one failure punished many. In the army, Rome used decimation, and it turned comrades into executioners by design. Once fear enters the ranks, even victory can start feeling like a gamble. If this story's got you hooked, show some love for the channel right now. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and stick around, because the wildest Roman torture method is still coming, and trust me, you'll want to see this. Here comes number 15. Decimation forced soldiers to beat comrades to death. Decimation executed 1 in every 10 men in a disgraced Roman unit. A cohort might hold 480 to 500 soldiers, so the order could kill around 50 at once. Do you feel the punch? You could fight hard and still die because a lot said so. The unlucky man was beaten or stoned by the other 9, which forced complicity. That detail is the point. Rome turned friends into tools, and the guilt stayed afterward. Historians link the practice to early Republic campaigns and to Crassus during the Spartacus War. After failures against Spartacus, Crassus decimated a cohort to restore discipline through terror. It was disciplined by trauma, because the unit learned obedience could decide survival more than skill. One discussion of Roman military discipline calls it an extreme punishment for serious transgressions. Even the threat kept soldiers in line, because a retreat could mean a 10% death chance. So the unit feared its own row as much as the enemy line, which reshaped behavior fast. Rome accepted a trade-off. Fear can improve obedience, but it can also break trust. That tension explains why decimation stayed rare yet famous, like a story every recruit heard. Back in the city, fear took a different shape when Rome chose flames over lots. Let's move to number 14. Burning alive cooked victims slowly in front of crowds. Roman legal commentary ties burning to serious crimes, and it shows up strongly by the 3rd century. By the jurist Paulus, parricides often faced burning instead of the sack in some contexts. Counterfeiters and poisoners could also face flames, because those crimes threatened public trust. Justinian's reforms in the 6th century replaced poena culei entirely with burning for parricide. That shows the state preferred a method that erased remains and reduced burial conflicts. Do you see the pattern? Rome kept the moral label, but swapped the mechanics. Burning finished faster than crucifixion, but it created a different kind of fear. Fire destroyed clothing, skin, and recognition, so identity disappeared in front of witnesses. A commentator on Roman capital punishment links treason and parricide to the harshest penalties, including fire. That pairing tells you what Rome feared most: attacks on the state and attacks on family. Crowds carried the memory because smoke and screams travel farther than legal arguments. Yet spectacle also carried risk, because a crowd can turn sympathy into anger if it feels wrong. So Rome sometimes preferred a quieter death that kept streets clean and reduced public reaction. That is where strangulation fits, because it needed little equipment and left few visible traces. When a rope replaces fire, the fear shifts from spectacle to silence. Next one is number 13. Strangulation crushed airways while the body stayed conscious. Roman sources discuss strangulation as common inside cities where blood caused social and religious discomfort. Apart from beheading, it became a standard, simple execution because it required little setup. That practical benefit mattered in crowded streets where officials wanted order more than spectacle. Some high-profile enemies died this way in prisons, away from crowds and away from debate. In parricide rituals described by jurists, rods came first, then strangulation, then disposal. So the method sat inside the procedure, not just behind closed doors by criminals. Strangulation takes tens of seconds to a few minutes, depending on method and resistance. That short span feels long when you remain conscious and aware of the cord tightening. Do you notice how Rome controlled attention here? The city heard rumors, not screams. Officials could kill in a cell and keep the story small, which helped during political tension. It also reduced the chance of a martyr scene that could energize supporters in public squares. So strangulation served power by limiting witnesses, even though it still delivered a hard ending. For citizens condemned by the state, Rome often framed the sword as a cleaner option. Yet a sword depends on skill, and skill fails, which could turn a clean death into chaos. That risk sets up beheading, where the promised speed depended on one person's hand. Let's move to number 12. Beheading often took multiple blows to finish. Roman capital punishment treated beheading as a method often reserved for citizens and higher status offenders. Political trials could end with condemnation to the sword, framed as less shameful than crosses. That framing mattered because Rome used punishment to enforce status as much as guilt. One overview notes slaves could die for forgery, while citizens often faced fines or exile instead. But when the state chose death for a citizen, it presented the blade as the cleaner option. Do you trust that promise? Because ancient execution scenes often depended on training and steadiness. Across cultures, execution records show even trained headsmen sometimes needed multiple strokes. A victim might move, the weapon might glance, and suddenly the crowd sees struggle instead of closure. Rome had no guarantee against that because a human arm controls the strike, not a machine. The real difference often came after death, because a citizen's family might receive the body. Burial mattered in a culture that feared the unburied dead and valued funeral rites strongly. A slave or rebel often lost that final courtesy, which extended punishment beyond the last breath. So even privileged death carried risk, and risk kept fear alive for everyone watching. When Rome wanted a slower, quieter removal, it could abandon people instead of executing them directly. That brings in exposure, where weather and time become the weapon without a visible executioner. Here comes number 11. Exposure left prisoners to rot under sun, cold, and animals. Exposure appears across the ancient Mediterranean, and Rome used abandonment as a punishment tool too. Instead of a guard swinging a weapon, time, weather, and animals did the killing. Why would a state choose that? Because it kept hands clean and reduced public scenes. In Roman justice, aqua et ignis interdictio meant denial of water and fire, pushing someone out. A person under that order lost community protection and had to leave Roman territory. Exposure feels like the harsher cousin because it offered far less chance of survival. Officials could abandon prisoners on remote coasts, rocky hills, or hostile borderlands. Records rarely give precise numbers because the whole point was offstage death without paperwork. One day, someone stood in chains. Then weeks later, another traveler found bones or nothing. That uncertainty also spread fear, because people imagined the worst and filled gaps with rumors. It shifted responsibility too, since locals might find the victim and face a choice: help or report. So exposure turned communities into part of punishment, even without courts in the scene. When Rome wanted the opposite, a warning no one could miss, it pinned bodies upright in public. That leads into impalement-style deaths, where an upright post becomes a message without words. Once you see a body fixed to wood, you understand why roads and gates mattered so much. Let's move to number 10. Impalement pierced bodies and kept victims alive for hours. Greek and Roman authors use verbs that can mean impale as well as crucify, blurring the line. Some cases sit between a cross and a stake, and ancient audiences often accepted the overlap. What mattered was the result, a body fixed upright where people had to look. Exact Roman numbers for impalement are hard to pin down from surviving sources. Yet the method fits the wider region's toolkit, and Rome used public post-execution as a warning. A legal historian notes stake-style deaths and crucifixion overlap in purpose, even when details vary. The purpose stayed simple: pick a road, a gate, or a frontier point, then display power. Every traveler reads the warning without stone carvings, because the body is the message. Do you see why empires love this? It turns movement itself into a viewing schedule. Impalement-style displays also reduced equipment needs, because one upright post could replace complex setups. Bodies could be left up after death, so decay extended the warning without extra cost. That persistence made fear feel permanent, especially in newly controlled regions where loyalty was shaky. Some condemned people avoided public posts, yet their suffering stretched longer underground instead. That is damnatio ad metalla, where the court sent people to mines as a slow death sentence. When a judge says ad metalla, the punishment becomes work, dust, and time. Here comes number 9. Damnatio ad metalla worked people to death in hellish mines. Damnatio ad metalla is called the second severest Roman penalty, just below direct execution. Legal studies describe it as punishment for lower status people, including slaves, captives, criminals, and Christians. Why choose mines? Because the state could remove a person and still extract value through labor. Scholarly discussion notes that under the empire, more convicts were sent to mines rather than killed outright. The sentence stripped citizenship and freedom, turning a person into a penal slave until death. That death often came within a few years or less from exhaustion, accidents, and disease. We know individual names tied to this punishment, including Pope Pontian in 235 CE. He died after condemnation to the mines in Sardinia, which shows leaders could be removed quietly. Sources also mention bishops like Silvanus of Gaza facing similar fate, reinforcing the pattern. Executions end in hours or days, but mines stretch the end across thousands of hammer blows. Every breath of dust is part of the sentence, and every shift carries collapse risk. Do you notice the difference? This punishment hides suffering, so cities see metal, not bodies. That hidden suffering made the method politically useful, because fewer crowds meant fewer protests. Still, Rome also used very public methods again, especially with crucifixion mechanics like the patibulum. Once you carry that crossbeam, you learn how Rome used weight and breathing as tools. Let's move to number 8. Crucifixion by patibulum dislocated arms until breathing failed. Modern studies estimate the patibulum crossbeam at 34 to 57 kilograms, heavy enough to crush stamina quickly. In many reconstructions, the condemned carried only that beam, turning the walk into punishment. Why only the beam? Because upright posts often stood ready outside the city, saving time. When the condemned reached the site, the patibulum was hoisted onto the stipes and fixed in place. Arms stretched across that beam pulled shoulders and chest, creating growing strain over hours. Medical articles describe progressive difficulty with exhalation, leading to slow suffocation as muscles fail. The body must push up to breathe better, then collapse again when strength drops. That cycle repeats until exhaustion wins, which is why some victims lasted many hours. Do you see why this terrified people? It turns breathing into a constant task with no relief. In 1968, archaeologists found the remains of Yehohanan in Jerusalem with a nail through his heel. It remains the only confirmed crucifixion skeleton so far, making it rare physical proof. That single find shows how the body could hang, twist, and lock into painful angles. So the patibulum turned a person into a hanging weight long before the heart finally stopped. Rome could also extend survival with devices, and one of the clearest is the sedile. When you learn what the sedile did, you start seeing suffering as something Rome could fine-tune. Next one is number 7. Crucifixion by sedile forced victims to sit on a spike. Sources and studies mention the sedile, a small seat or peg fixed to some crosses. By letting the victim push some weight onto support, executioners extended survival time deliberately. A French summary notes the sedile helped the crucified breathe better, delaying death. A forensic article says devices like the sedile let someone sit on a cross, prolonging agony. That means the body avoids collapsing fully, so the breathing struggle keeps cycling for hours. Do you see how qualified that is? It turns suffering into a schedule, not an accident. Evidence tied to Yehohanan suggests a sedile supported only his left buttock. That detail matters because it twisted his posture, forcing legs into a 60 to 65 degree angle. Each push to breathe loaded that small support again, intensifying pain while the crowd watched. Why would Rome want longer? Because longer visibility means more people absorb the warning. More hours on display also creates more stories, and stories travel faster than official announcements. So devices like the sundial show Rome cared about timing, not just killing. Once you notice that timing obsession, a quiet method like starvation makes grim sense too. Forced starvation appears less as a named sentence and more as a practical tool in prisons and sieges. When bowls stay empty by design, time becomes the weapon again, just without wood or nails. Let's move to number 6. Forced starvation let bodies eat themselves from the inside. Modern medical studies show adults can survive about 30 to 70 days without food, depending on health and water. Rome understood supply control, using hunger in sieges and confinement to break resistance. Why is that effective? Because hunger changes decisions faster than arguments or threats. Historians of ancient warfare record sieges where entire towns faced hunger for weeks or months. Those situations produced death tolls in the thousands, and the suffering pushed surrender or collapse. The state learned that controlled supply can end resistance while reducing direct fighting losses. Within prisons, denial of food could remove rivals without a public spectacle. Instead of a dramatic execution record, you get people who died in custody across years. Do you see the advantage for power? Fewer witnesses and fewer chances for public sympathy. Biology explains the process. Fat burns first, then muscle breaks down, then organs fail. That decline becomes visible, so guards can measure progress without lifting a weapon. The punishment hides inside empty bowls, which makes it feel quiet even while it destroys. Forced starvation turned time itself into a weapon, and every missed ration pushed the end closer. When Rome wanted pain and message together again, it moved back to public flogging in the street. A whip in a crowded forum taught a different lesson, because everyone heard and everyone looked. Here comes number 5. Public flogging shattered flesh to warn everyone watching. A legal overview notes early Roman criminal law relied heavily on scourging and fines as punishments. Public flogging worked as live advertising for Roman power, because officials used crowds as witnesses. Why do it in public? Because fear spreads faster when neighbors see it happen. Slaves and lower-class citizens often received beatings in markets or near forums. Dozens or hundreds could watch, and the humiliation landed as hard as the pain. A late antiquity church council even issued an ordinance against excessive flogging, showing how common it was. The number of strokes varied, yet the goal stayed fixed, teaching the offender and warning spectators. Every blow delivered 2 lessons at once: pain for one body and fear for everyone nearby. The whip became a portable courtroom because punishment traveled wherever officials chose to display authority. Unlike a fine, the memory of a public beating stayed in a street story for years. People remembered where someone collapsed long after forgetting the exact charge. That is the real power. The location becomes a landmark of warning. If the victim survived, Rome still had ways to remove them from normal life. Forced labor camps destroyed bodies slowly while producing economic value for the state. So survival after flogging could still lead into years of punishment, just under a different name. Next one is number 4. Forced labor camps destroyed bodies long before death. Studies of Roman law describe labor condemnation as a slow death sentence under the Principate. Beyond damnatio ad metalla, Rome used other forced labor setups on quarries, estates, and public projects. Why expand it? Because the state gained work output while removing unwanted people from society. Workdays in mines or quarries could run well over 10 hours, with poor air and heavy loads. Constant risk of collapse meant injuries were common, and medical care was limited or absent. Some estimates for ancient mine slaves suggest life expectancy of only a few years after arrival. Legal texts sometimes distinguish temporary and lifelong labor sentences, But even temporary could ruin health. Crushed joints, lung problems, and chronic pain could follow a person long after release. Do you see the trick? Death could arrive as an accident, while the system claimed it was only work. Forced labor camps let Rome extract economic value from punishment while still erasing people socially. That trade-off made sense for administrators, but it built resentment among families and communities. The person disappeared into a work site, and the city received stone, metal, or roads in return. Some punishments swapped dust for water, keeping the same goal of control with fewer visible wounds. Judicial drowning offered a bloodless method that still forced helpless minutes on the condemned. Once you picture drowning as a procedure, you start realizing how much Rome valued clean-looking violence. Let's move to number 3. Judicial drowning filled lungs slowly with freezing water. Roman legal logic includes drowning through poena culae from at least the 1st century BCE onward. That sack penalty remained listed into Justinian's time in the 6th century CE. Why does that matter? Because it shows drowning stayed a lawful tool for centuries. Outside the sack context, drowning offered a bloodless execution method near coasts, bridges, or rivers. It required little equipment, and it removed the body quickly from public view afterward. Some later notes even list sack drownings in Saxony into the 18th century, showing the idea spread. Modern physiology says loss of consciousness underwater usually comes after 1 to 2 minutes of breath holding. Final cardiac arrest comes several minutes later, so the experience includes a long window of panic. Do you see why restraint matters? Because helplessness turns minutes into something that feels endless. In the sack scenario, cloth and animals add chaos, yet the key point stays the same. The court controls binding, entry into water, and who witnesses it, shaping the story afterward. Drowning also reduced burial rites, which mattered in a culture that valued funerals and feared unburied dead. Some punishments aimed beyond death, changing the body so the sentence followed a person for life. Mutilation created permanent marks, like a visible criminal record that never expired. When the state cuts or brands, the person keeps living, but the punishment keeps speaking. Next one is number 2. Mutilation cut off hands, tongues, or genitals as punishment. Legal history discusses punishments that create visible, permanent signs of guilt on the body. Roman law includes options like amputation, branding, and disfigurement, though lists vary by period. Why keep someone alive after punishment? Because a marked body can warn others without another trial. Mutilation could remove the tools of a crime, like a forger's hand or a slanderer's tongue. Some sources describe cutting off hands, tongues, or genitals as punishments for certain offenses. Do you see the point? The state removes function, then the person lives with the loss. The cost is long-term because work options shrink and vulnerability grows in a world with little support. Every transaction, journey, or argument happens under that visible reminder. That creates a middle ground between execution and fines, where fear lasts for years. For rulers, that middle ground offered control without creating a martyr scene through public killing. For the victim, it often meant slow punishment through poverty, exclusion, and constant risk of abuse. The body becomes a sentence you carry until death, whether that takes weeks or decades. When Rome wanted total erasure, it used punishments that removed a person from land and burial entirely. Live burial fits that logic, sealing someone underground to suffocate in darkness. Once the ground becomes the cell, you start thinking about air as a countdown. And the last is number 1. Live burial locked victims underground to suffocate in darkness. Modern tests show a human in a small enclosed volume can use up breathable oxygen in tens of minutes to hours. Direct evidence for live burial in Rome is rarer than for crosses or arenas. Why bring it up at all? Because classical accounts show it as a known option for extreme cases. Some stories from the wider world describe traitors or sacrilegious people walled up or buried. The goal was killing, and also sealing away pollution from the community in ritual terms. Roman writers already place parricide and high treason at the top of punishment scales. An article on Roman penalties explains that those crimes attack the state or family itself. Live burial matches that logic. Out of sight, out of the living world, and without a grave marker. Do you see the extra cruelty? The person loses even the chance to be mourned publicly. For spectators, it could happen behind a wall or in a pit, limiting witnesses by design. For the person inside, time shrinks to heartbeat, darkness, and the weight of earth above. Every breath shortens the clock, and the mind knows it, which makes panic grow. This method also avoids blood, which helps officials claim purity while still delivering death. It is a reminder that Rome could build laws and roads while engineering removal with cold detail. If this is what survived in sources, imagine how many methods stayed unrecorded, yet still shaped fear. What did you think?